On the afternoon of August 23, 2012, 16-year-old Hannah Truelove, a beloved daughter and friend, returned home from school to her apartment in Gainesville, Georgia. She was last seen hanging out with friends at the picnic table area of her apartment complex that evening. But then, at around 7:30 p.m., she vanished. The next day, Hannah's body was discovered in a wooded area behind the apartments, and it was clear that this was no accident. Hannah Truelove had been murdered. It's been just over 12 years since Hannah was killed, and investigators are still searching for the person responsible. Hey everyone, welcome back to Detective Perspective. My name is Derrick Levasseur. I'm a licensed private investigator and former police detective. Each week I'll be covering an unsolved case in story format. I'll then give you my perspective on the investigation and provide contact information for the individuals or organizations connected to the case so that if you have any tips, you can contact them directly and maybe you can help solve a case. So if you're someone who's interested in true crime, specifically unsolved cases, and you would like to hear my opinion on those investigations, please consider subscribing, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you use. So as I was researching Hannah's case, it sounded very familiar to a case that I worked a few years ago in North Carolina, the Judy Rawlings case. Some of you may have seen that featured on Breaking Homicide. A lot of similarities in this case. Not exact, but definitely some things that I observed and I read that brought me back to North Carolina and made me think about how the initial investigation was conducted. I had some good conversations with those investigators when I was down there, but there were definitely some mistakes made by the original investigators, and that's why we are where we are right now in Judy's case, where I believe we know who did it, and yet no one has been found guilty of her murder. Yes, there's someone out there who's in prison for it, Tony Sierra Jr., but he hasn't been held responsible for what I believe he did to Judy. Again, just in my professional opinion. So here we are with another case. Hannah was 16 years old, similar situation, and yet no one has been held accountable for their actions. And I wonder if it's a situation where we really just don't have enough evidence to get it over the finish line. Or is this a case of tunnel vision where law enforcement officers locked in on one specific theory, one specific person, and didn't explore other angles that could also have played out here? We're going to go over all of it. I'm going to give my perspective at the end, and I'm looking forward to hearing your opinions on this case as far as, do we have the person, we just need a little bit more? Or is there other things that need to be done in this investigation? Let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right into this week's case. Hannah Truelove was born on May 18, 1996 to parents Jeff and Mona. Growing up in Georgia, Hannah was known for her sweet and calm demeanor and her great sense of humor. She also loved gymnastics and singing, and according to her dad, she had the voice of an angel. When Hannah was 7, her parents separated and she began living with her mother, Mona. Despite the split, she remained very close with her father and saw him often. In May of 2012, Hannah turned 16, and she and Mona then moved into an apartment at the Lake Lanier Club Apartments in Gainesville, Georgia, which is around an hour outside of Atlanta. The apartments were part of a gated complex located right next to Lake Lanier, and a wooded area with walking paths was the only thing separating the lake from the apartment buildings. In the middle of August, Hannah began her junior year at Gainesville High School. She was starting to think seriously about her future and had dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Tragically, Hannah would never get the chance to make those dreams a reality. On Thursday, August 23rd, Hannah went to school as usual. Since she wasn't able to drive on her own yet, she rode the bus to and from school. When she got home that afternoon, she had the apartment all to herself since her mother had to work and wouldn't get home for hours. Mona arrived home around 8 p.m., but the apartment was empty. Now initially, she didn't think much of it. Hannah often spent time outside or with her friends, but as the evening grew darker and Hannah still hadn't returned, Mona knew something was wrong. It was completely unlike Hannah not to be home before dark. At around 9 p.m., Mona called Hannah's father, Jeff, to see if Hannah was with him, but he said she wasn't. So for the next hour, Mona continued trying to find her daughter, but no one knew where she was. Hannah still wasn't home by 10:15, so Mona finally called 911 to report her missing. According to the Gainesville Times, officers from the Gainesville Police Department arrived and began searching the area around the complex, but there was no sign of Hannah anywhere, so the officers took it a step further and woke up her friends who lived at the complex and asked if they had seen her. Multiple friends told the officers that they had last seen Hannah earlier that evening. At around 4 p.m., she walked to the picnic tables at the apartments, and for the next 3.5 hours, she stayed there, hanging out with other teens. The last time anyone could recall seeing her was at 7:30 p.m. when she was still at the picnic tables. After speaking with Hannah's friends, officers did check for surveillance footage to corroborate their statements, but unfortunately, there were no cameras at the picnic table area. The search for Hannah continued, but no trace of her was found. And I do have some opinions on the search itself, but I'm going to hold them off for a couple more minutes because we're going to get to a really difficult part in this story right now. On the evening of Friday, August 24th, a man was walking through the wooded area behind the Lake Lanier Club Apartments when he spotted what he initially thought was a mannequin submerged in water at the bottom of a secluded ravine. Now, this area was typically dry and covered in vegetation, but heavy rains between Thursday night and Friday morning had created a fast-moving creek. As the man approached the ravine, he quickly realized that this mannequin was actually a body. The Gainesville police were immediately called to the scene, and upon arrival, they discovered that the body belonged to 16-year-old Hannah Truelove. Now, at this point, we do know that Hannah was stabbed multiple times, but the police have not publicly stated how many times or where she was stabbed, and as I've said on numerous cases, I completely understand why. They should keep that information internal for the sake of the investigation. It doesn't matter at this point where or how many times she was stabbed for us, and I also think it's not something that the family needs to know at this point either. So knowing that she was stabbed for me is even more than you get in a lot of these cases. So at this point, that's all we know. We don't know if there was another weapon involved. We do know at least there was a knife. And at this point, I also want to talk about the search itself. I know I said I was going to wait a couple of minutes. Now's the time. If you look at a photo of the area where the apartments were located, there is this wooded area behind the apartment complex, and it's large. I'm not going to say it's something you could search in a couple minutes, but depending on staffing, depending on volunteers, and depending on resources like canines, it is an area that can be searched pretty quickly and pretty extensively. Now, because of the weather, that may have hindered the search, but I do find it interesting that her body was found near the apartment complex, and it took a civilian to find her. Now, maybe if it had been a couple more days, they would have, meaning law enforcement, would have found Hannah. But I do wonder, at the time when the search began, what was the current state of Hannah? Was she still alive? Was she already deceased? My guess is that she was already gone. But we'll never know. And it does make me wonder about the search itself. How extensive was it? How many people were involved? And was there more that could have been done? I'm not sitting here trying to Monday morning quarterback things, but as someone who's expressed to you guys multiple times, with a missing persons case, time is of the essence. Seconds can be the difference between life or death. And so whenever these cases come up and we find that the victims were relatively close by, that thought always goes through my mind. And I can't help but wonder, although we may never have the answer to that question. We still have a lot more to go in this case. We're just scratching the surface. But before we do, let's take our first break. The summer is right around the corner, and it's time to get those beach bodies ready. So fuel up with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for the summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes, so no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again, if you're on the fence of which add-ons to try, my personal recommendation, strawberry banana smoothie or the bacon and smoked cheddar egg bites. Go with both. It's a great combo. You won't regret it. And just because these meals are ready fast, it doesn't mean the quality isn't there, which is one of the things I love about Factor. You can treat yourself to restaurant quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. Enjoy effortless support for your lifestyle by choosing from 6 menu preferences to help you manage calories, maximize protein intake, avoid meat, or simply eat well balanced. So if you like what you hear, head on over to factormeals.com/detective50 and use my code detective50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code detective50, all one word, right with the numbers right after it, at factormeals.com/detective50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Okay, we're back in a little bit of a curveball in this story. After the Gainesville police arrived, they figured out that Hannah's body had actually been found outside their jurisdiction, meaning the case had to be transferred to the Hall County Sheriff's Office. When Hall County investigators arrived, they immediately began processing the scene, but the recent heavy rain had them at a significant disadvantage. The rain had washed away a lot of trace evidence, which could have included blood, semen, saliva, hair, you name it. When you have this amount of water, everything is being washed away instantaneously, which obviously makes the investigation that much more difficult. But despite these challenges, investigators did their best to search the area for any remaining trace evidence, although at this point, we don't know how much was actually found. Although I will say this, according to WSB-TV, they were able to find some evidence. How much, we really don't know. And as I just mentioned, a lot of the blood that was associated with the scene had already been washed away, which is a huge blow to the case. Now, after processing the scene, investigators theorized that Hannah was most likely killed at the spot where her body was found. And I don't disagree with that theory. When you think about the proximity of the apartment complex and you think about the duration in which she went missing and when she was found, it doesn't seem reasonable to think she had went to a completely separate crime scene somewhere else away from the area and then would have been brought back there just to dispose of her body. More than likely, she was at the picnic table area, something transpired, she went into the woods, and that's where she was killed. If not right at that very spot, very close by. The investigators also believed that more than likely Hannah knew her killer and she either willingly went to this location or she was led there. Now, the lead investigator on the case, Detective Dan Franklin, explained to 11 Alive that there were just too many people outside the complex on the evening she went missing for it to be an abduction. In his opinion, there's no way that would have gone unnoticed. Basically, what they're saying here is that if Hannah had been taken against her will, someone would have heard something and they would have came forward with that information when she was reported missing, and yet nobody did. So because of where she was found and this information, that's why investigators believe that Hannah went to the location voluntarily with someone that she knew. And this is where this case ties back to Judy Rawlings, which I mentioned at the opening of this episode. For a little backdrop, I don't want to go too deep into it. If you want to check out the episode, you can. I think it's still available. Judy Rawlings was around the same age. She was last seen with some boys, one of them being Tony Sierra Jr. They were last seen riding four-wheelers into this wooded area. They go into the wooded area. Then later, Judy's body is found in that wooded area with her pants down. Now, it's my belief, based on information that I gathered during the investigation, that Judy and the boys went into the woods. Something went down that Judy did not approve of, and she informed the boys that she was going to tell someone about it. And that was when they made the decision to kill her. And I have claimed this from the rooftops about Tony. I've worked with the police department. I believe there was enough to at least attempt to indict him. Unfortunately, they disagreed. And shortly after that episode aired, Tony was arrested and charged with child molestation, and he's in prison for like 30 years now because of it. He's an absolute scumbag. There's no doubt about it. And it's always been my professional opinion that Tony murdered Judy. And there was even a person who came forward later after the episode aired who corroborated this theory and supported it. And yet here we are, all these years later, and Tony's in prison, but not for the murder of Judy Rawlings. But that's a story for a different day. Still pisses me off daily, I promise you that. But there are a lot of similarities with this case to that one, and I can see where law enforcement is coming from as far as the specifics of this case. No signs of an abduction, no one heard anything, no one saw anything. The close proximity of where Hannah was last seen alive to where she was found, it would align with her going into the woods voluntarily. However, as we get into my perspective, I'm also going to offer an alternate theory. But as far as the story is concerned, investigators at this point were really honed in on this theory that Hannah knew her killer. So in the hopes of identifying this person, they began conducting interviews with family and friends. And through these conversations, they learned of a rumor that Hannah had a secret cell phone, one her parents were unaware of. Now, despite their best efforts, investigators were never able to locate this alleged secret phone. However, they did confirm that Hannah communicated with her friends using a Nintendo DS. And for those of you who don't know, it's a little gaming console that has like a community chat where you can communicate with people that you're friends with online. Now, the DS was recovered and thoroughly examined, but according to 11 Alive, nothing significant was found. In a search for further evidence, investigators also reviewed Hannah's Twitter account and learned that her final tweet was sent at around 3:30 p.m. on August 23rd. It was a reply to another tweet, and it simply read, quote, yes ma'am. Investigators noted that Hannah had been active on Twitter in the days and weeks leading up to her murder, but one particular tweet on August 12th stood out to them. That afternoon, Hannah tweeted, quote, I got me an ugly ass stalker. Investigators spoke with Hannah's friends and family to figure out if she really had a stalker, but this was the first time they had ever heard of it. According to the Atlanta Constitution, Jeff had seen Hannah just a few days before her murder, and she didn't mention being scared of anyone to him. It doesn't mean it wasn't going on, but you would think with their close relationship, she would have mentioned something if she was concerned about it. Additionally, Hannah's friends said they had seen the tweet when it was originally posted, but didn't think anything of it since she never mentioned anything about the stalker to them. So at first glance, it seemed like Hannah's tweet about being stalked was nothing more than a joke. However, investigators were not willing to take any chances, so they launched a long-term investigation to determine if there was any truth behind the tweet, and this took months. In the end, they concluded that Hannah's tweet was not a credible lead, but rather, quote, teenage drama type of stuff. Now, this can be demoralizing. As I mentioned, they took months looking at this, but as I've said in other cases, you have to explore every lead. You have to go down that entire path, and you have to explore all the roads off that path. And it's a reality that every road might be a dead end. But in order to conduct a thorough investigation, that's what you have to do. You have to check off each box to ensure that that theory is not a possibility. So even though at first it looked like this was just someone making an offhand comment, they still explored it. And ultimately they came to the conclusion that it was a teenager just maybe stating something about someone at their school or someone who lived at the complex, and they were referring to them as a stalker, but in reality, it was just someone who may have been interested in her and she wasn't interested in them. I do have questions. I do wonder that even if this was a person who was, for the most part, innocent, where were they on the day in question? Were investigators even able to identify this person that she was referring to, regardless of how innocent it may have seemed? These are things we may never know. At this point, you have to take some of what investigators have said and assume that it's accurate, because more than likely, I'm never going to get access to the files. So you can question everything, but it does appear that they took their time with this one. And for them to come out and publicly state that this is what they believed it to be, lets me know that there's probably something there that's concrete that led them to this conclusion. Now, the investigation continued, and on September 7th, Hall County investigators provided an update to the public, sharing that they were working around the clock on the case. They had also enlisted the help of 10 GBI agents and 4 GBI analysts and had narrowed their focus to, quote, just a few people of interest. According to the Huffington Post, investigators still believed Hannah knew her killer. and they were now on the lookout for a late 1990s to early 2000s four-door passenger car that had been seen at Hannah's apartment complex on the evening of August 23rd. The vehicle, possibly a Chevy or a Dodge, was described as having, quote, substantial front-end damage and a driver's door that was either white or a lighter shade of silver. Investigators stated that the vehicle was certainly in the area of the apartment complex on August 23rd. In fact, it had been seen with Hannah at one point, and she might have even exited the vehicle. Investigators believed that the people in the car held crucial information that could help solve Hannah's case. They asked anyone with information to come forward, but unfortunately, that did not happen. On September 12th, Sergeant Stephen Wilbanks, the Hall County Public Information Officer, appeared on Nancy Grace's show to discuss the ongoing investigation into Hannah's murder. Wilbanks revealed that investigators believed the perpetrator was familiar with the area where Hannah's body was found. He explained that the wooded area where Hannah was found was frequently used by both residents of the apartment complex and their visitors who would go down to the lake for fishing or walks. Wilbanks pointed out that there wasn't a park or other public access point immediately adjacent to the complex, which meant easy access from outside the area was unlikely. Additionally, since the complex was a gated community, it wasn't somewhere where random people could just come and go. Now, during this interview, Nancy asked Wilbanks if residents were cooperating with the investigation. Wilbanks acknowledged that they had faced some challenges and that certain individuals were not cooperating fully, quote, to one degree or another. However, he did emphasize that a significant number of people had been helpful in the investigation. Hannah's father, Jeff, also joined the conversation on the show, and when Nancy asked if Hannah had a boyfriend at the time of her death, Jeff said that she did not, but mentioned that she did have a, quote, friend in the neighborhood that she liked. Now, I don't really know what to make of that statement. I have to imagine that Jeff and Mona have been speaking with investigators and have been told certain things off record, maybe not specifics, maybe not actual names, but obviously the theories that have been put out publicly, maybe some more information about that, why investigators felt that way. And understandably so, when investigators are saying that they believed the killer was someone Hannah knew, Jeff and Mona are going to start to think about those people that she was connected to, people that she may have been spending time with at the apartment complex. And you can see where Jeff would want to mention this name. And what I read between the lines is that this was a person she liked and that she may have been talking to. And if this theory is correct, this is also someone that if they asked her to go to the woods with them, she would more than likely comply. So I don't know who this person is. I'm assuming they've been talked to, but that's what I take away from this conversation. Jeff did not make this statement for no reason. There was a purpose behind it, and that's what I think it was. We still have more to go in this case, including my perspective, but before we do, let's take our last break. Have you or someone you know ever been a victim of identity theft? Have you been harassed, stalked, or maybe doxxed? Or are you someone who's just looking for better ways to protect yourself online? If you fit any of those categories, I have a service you might be interested in. Listen, I'm someone who's online all the time, and as a person who exists publicly, especially as someone who shares his opinions online, I am hyper aware of safety and security, and that's why I personally use Delete Me. And regardless of what you may think, your data is being shared online. Make no mistake about it. Your name, contact info, social security number, your home address, even information about your family members and friends, it's all being compiled by data brokers and sold online. And that's where Delete Me comes in, because with this subscription service, you're removing your personal info from hundreds of these data brokers. All you have to do is sign up and provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts will take it from there. Delete Me also sends you regular personalized privacy reports showing you what they found, where they found it, and what they removed. This is something that I see every month. I open it up, and it's kind of scary because sometimes it's in the hundreds, if not thousands of places where my personal data is online. It shows me how many exactly they found and how many they were able to remove and where they were located. It gives me a reassurance that, listen, even though I'm not actively looking for these things, someone out there is looking at it daily and making sure that my information is protected as possible. And I love looking at this report, although in some ways it's kind of scary. You see exactly the number of places where it was found and how many places it was removed from. And so it's reassuring to see that what you're paying for is actually working. But Delete Me isn't just a one-time service. It's always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you do not want on the internet. So take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me, now at a special discount for my listeners and viewers. Today, you can get 20% off a Delete Me plan by texting DETECTIVE to 64,000. Once again, text DETECTIVE to 64,000. That's DETECTIVE to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Okay, we're back, and after Nancy's interview, the investigation pressed on, and on February 20th, 2013, investigators announced a $1,000 reward, hoping it would generate new leads. They also emphasized that they were still looking for that silver car that was seen at the complex. That same day, Mona broke her silence and spoke publicly for the first time since Hannah's murder. According to WSB-TV, she said, quote, "Hannah's family and her friends have been living a nightmare since Hannah was reported missing and found murdered. Our entire family has suffered and continues to suffer every minute of that fateful evening." Mona continued, stating, quote, "I am haunted by Hannah's death, as any mother can understand. Please help my family by coming forward with information, even if that information is about your son or daughter. I feel sure you know that they can't come to grips with Hannah's death until they are truthful about what happened to Hannah. We can't go back and save Hannah, but we can honor her memory and bring closure to her tragic death." Despite Mona's pleas, no one came forward. Now, even though there wasn't a break in Hannah's case after Mona's words, I still think they were extremely important. First and foremost, beautifully said. But secondly, as I said with Jeff, I feel like they're saying a lot without saying too much. It sounds to me, whether they're right or wrong, that they believe there's a group of friends who know exactly what happened to Hannah. And that's who she was speaking to. Not only the friends, but also their family members, their parents. Because at this point, the kids haven't came forward. So in this moment, Mona's hoping she can speak to the mothers and the fathers to say, hey, listen, as a parent, help me here. I understand this could be your son or daughter, but think about what your child has to live with for the rest of their life. This is an opportunity to get this burden off their chests, to do the right thing. And that's what she was gearing toward. Unfortunately, the strategy didn't work, but I still like to hear it as an investigator because it does give us some insight into where this case is behind the scenes. They have definitely been told that Hannah knew her killers and that more than likely these people were close to her. And it also tells us that they believe it's a group of people and not just one person. So fascinating stuff from the victim's family, even though they're being very cryptic in what they're saying. Now, in August of 2013, Hall County and the GBI released a statement marking the 1-year anniversary of Hannah's murder. They mentioned that tips had dwindled and they urged anyone with information to come forward. They also reminded the public that they were still on the lookout for the silver car, noting that by this point it could have been repaired. There's something with this car. Not only did they see Hannah with the car, but they're really gung-ho about it. They want to know who's the operator, who's the owner. And I agree with them. At this point, the car has been repaired, it has been repainted, or it's at the bottom of a lake right now. But I do feel, based on what they've told us, that if their theory is correct, if they find the car, they find the suspect. That's why I like some of those YouTube channels that go around and they dive for these vehicles and these bodies of water. In many of those cases, they're looking for cars that are connected to missing persons. But in this situation, if they happen to find the car, they could find a vehicle that's connected to a killer. Now let's jump a little forward to 2016 when the lead investigator, Detective Franklin, who I mentioned earlier, provided an update on Hannah's case during an interview with WSB-TV. He shared that he works on Hannah's case every day and that the department had recently revisited all the evidence, applying the latest advances in technology to try and uncover new leads. Detective Franklin revealed that several individuals continued to be persons of interest in the investigation. However, he emphasized that they needed someone on, quote, the fringe to come forward with crucial information that could lead to an arrest. See, this is where we go back to Judy Rawlings, because that's what I also believe in that case. Tony Sierra Jr., I do believe he killed Judy, but there were other people there. And I'm not going to get into those names for this case, but I always hope that those individuals who may not have been directly involved would come forward and provide the information that would tie back to Tony. Unfortunately, in that case, they never did. Although I will say, if they're watching, there's still time. I think the same applies here. So if law enforcement is right and this is what happened, then more than one person knows the specifics of Hannah's murder. And the hope is that some of those individuals were just witnesses and not participants. Here's how you get them. First and foremost, do the right thing. If you didn't have any direct involvement, come forward so that the people who did can be held responsible. Secondly, if that doesn't work, if this ever does come to light and it is found that you were there and you did things to help cover this up or were not cooperative with police, you could also be charged even though you weren't directly involved. So it's a risk you run every day by staying silent. Just something to consider. Now, Franklin ended his interview by stating that he was never going to give up on getting justice for Hannah. He said he did not get into law enforcement to let child killers go. Absolutely love this statement. Couldn't agree more. Go get him, Detective Franklin. Now we're going to fast forward again to 2 years later in 2018 when Detective Franklin spoke to 11 Alive. This time he shared his belief that more than one person might have been in the woods when Hannah was killed. He said, quote, "Who we try to reach are not necessarily the person that had the knife in their hand, but anybody that was present and maybe would be less culpable and didn't have as much responsibility but was just there, maybe in a situation they didn't want to be in." So you see what he's doing here? He's giving them an out. It's just what I said earlier. You have a situation where you're present, you know what happened, but you didn't actively participate. This is an opportunity for you to come forward, and more than likely, you will be given a deal where in exchange for your testimony, you won't face criminal charges. If you're listening out there and you know what happened, here's the olive branch. It's your opportunity to come forward. And this happened in 2018 when he made this statement, but I promise you, if you come forward now, I'm sure the deal is still on the table. Now, in August of 2022, just a few weeks before the 10-year anniversary of Hannah's murder, her mother Mona passed away at the age of 56, never learning what happened to her daughter. And it's unfortunate, but I will say, depending on what you believe in, she's with her now. And I'm sure there were many days in Mona's mind where that's all that she wanted. So I leave that part believing in that. Some of you may not. I respect it, but that's where my heart's at. Now, after Mona's passing later that month, Hannah's father, Jeff, spoke with the Gainesville Times about the pain of going a decade without answers. He described feeling stuck in time, waiting for someone to finally step forward and bring the case closer to being solved. Jeff said that he still holds on to the hope that someone with information will come forward, even if it's just to clear their conscience. Our friend Detective Franklin also spoke to the Gainesville Times about the investigation. He revealed that they actually have a specific suspect in mind, someone who has been on their radar since the very beginning. However, just like in many other cases that we discuss, there wasn't enough evidence to make an arrest, which is why no charges have ever been filed. Now, Detective Franklin wasn't able to reveal much information about this suspect, only that he is a man who knew Hannah before her death. Franklin said law enforcement had questioned him twice, but each time he denied any involvement in Hannah's murder. Despite all of this, Franklin said that he has not given up hope. He said, quote, "As long as I'm around, I'm going to keep moving forward and do what I have to do to get justice for Hannah." Now, unfortunately, even with all of those powerful words and a potential suspect, that's the last update we have in this case. Hannah's murder remains unsolved, and her family is still desperately searching for answers. Okay, let's dive into this perspective and expand on what was already said in this episode. I don't want to be redundant, but it's clear that investigators and the family believe this person that they're referring to is responsible. And you know what? They're probably right. They know way more about the case than I do. And it sounds like, based on what we do know, the proximity in which she was found to where she was last seen, the manner in which she was killed, and the fact that I do agree with them, based on this public area, if she had been taken against her will, someone would have heard something, someone would have reported seeing something, and yet we have nothing. You're looking at a situation here where, for all we know, the friends that were questioned as far as seeing her at the picnic table could also be persons of interest. One of them could also be the suspect. Now, law enforcement will never tell you that, but that's why you have me. I'm here to take you behind the curtain, and I'm telling you now that there's a real possibility that's exactly what's going on. So as law enforcement has said, if there were multiple people there, not everyone was holding the knife. And yes, we would have liked these people to come forward earlier, but it's not too late. If you were there but didn't participate directly, here's your opportunity to come forward and finally do the right thing. But they've already put that out there, and I think they've been very transparent about their theory on this case. But I want to offer a different alternate theory just in case. And I hope that this was explored at the time, but if it wasn't, it can still be done now. Although I will say it's going to be extensive. Let's say for a second that it's not this theory, that it was someone who had known Hannah beforehand. What if it was someone or a group of people who had approached Hannah while she was sitting at the picnic table and said, hey, we're going to go hang out in the woods, or we're going to go have a couple drinks, or we're going to go smoke for a little bit. I don't know if Hannah was into any of that. I'm not suggesting that she was. I'm going off my own childhood, so you judge me. But what if a group of people came up to her and she was bored and she was alone and decided, hey, yeah, you know what? It's right off the path. I'll go with him for a little bit. And then while there, something transpired that Hannah was uncomfortable with, and these individuals felt like if they let her go, it was going to be bad for them, so they decided to kill her. Well, if that's the case, and these individuals did not know Hannah prior to this incident, I still think it's someone who was at the apartment complex. As we've said in the episode, gated community, no other direct access to this area where she was found unless you're at the apartment complex. So I think it's safe to say that it would have to be a resident or someone visiting a resident. So what do you have to do there? You have to go through the task of gathering all the names of every single resident that lived at that apartment complex at that time. You have to then interview all of those individuals and rule out as many of them as you can via exculpatory evidence. And from the ones that can't be ruled out, you have to look into their criminal history to see what they've been involved with prior to that incident. And by the way, this is all stuff that they would be doing right when this occurred. Now, in hindsight, I would also not only be looking at what they did prior to Hannah's murder, but I would be looking for any charges that have accrued up to this point, 2024. What did they get themselves involved in after Hannah's death? Was there a pattern of behavior? Now, in addition to that, you also have to find out if any of these residents had individuals who were staying with them at the time of the incident, and you also have to look into their criminal history. I would also ask when they arrived and when they left. Did they happen to leave abruptly? Was it around the time that Hannah was found? All these things are extremely important and should have been done when the crime took place, but they can still be done now, even though it's going to be a daunting task, but that's what we get paid to do, and that's what needs to be done if it hasn't. I say this not to question the work of Detective Franklin or anyone else involved. I only say this to offer a different alternate opinion so that we ensure we don't have tunnel vision on something that may be wrong. From what I know, it does seem like they're on the right trail, but we've seen cases where it can go south very quickly. And I just want to make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And I'll also make this final point about the suspect they do have. In my own experiences, sometimes the investigators feel like they have enough, and it's the prosecutor or the state's attorney who says, no, I need more. At some point, and it still may be a little too soon for this, but if we get another 3 or 4 years, maybe it's time to take what you have, put together the best case you can, and give it a shot. Convene a grand jury and see what they say. At that point, what do you really have to lose? Mona's already gone, and Jeff is still here. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. At some point, even if you get the answers to what happened, the question is, does it really have an impact at that point? If this person has lived a free life for 30, 40 years and are on their deathbed, was justice really served? And I'll leave that question for you guys. Me personally, I don't think so. But this case is still relatively new, and we can still get closure for this family. And based on what we've heard, someone out there right now who's watching or listening to this episode may have the information that can unlock the answers to this case. So just to recap, on the evening of August 23rd, 2012, 16-year-old Hannah Truelove disappeared from the Lake Lanier Club Apartments in Gainesville, Georgia, after spending time with friends at a picnic table. The next day, her body was discovered in a wooded area behind the apartment complex. She had been stabbed multiple times. If you have any information about Hannah's murder, please call the Hall County tip line at 770-503-3232 or the GBI tip line at 800-597-8477. As always, my final words go out to Hannah's family. As I mentioned earlier, Mona is no longer with us, but it's my belief that she's now reunited with Hannah. So she's in a better place than us, if I'm right. But Jeff is still out there fighting. He's looking for answers for his daughter. He deserves justice. And now we have joined that fight with him. And I hope that one day, sooner than later, I'm able to come on here and tell you that the monster responsible for this has been caught. However, until that time, there's many more cases to cover and many more stories to be told. So I will be back here next week with a new case. But until that time, stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon.